Right. Well, greetings to you all from, I won't say a sunny Cornwall because the weather's here today has been so murky that you couldn't see 50 yards in front of your face. So hopefully the weather is better where you are. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes on some mines, maps and models of Nevada. And on the left-hand side, you'll see a picture of a head frame, which is at Tonopah, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The map in the middle is of a section of the mines in the Virginia City district, or the Comstock, as we know it over in the UK. And in the bottom corner is a section of a mine model. Right, Barbara, if you'd like to go to the next slide, please. So this is what my hobby time is spent doing most of. I build three-dimensional mine models, mainly for my interest in mining history, but it's turning into a bit more than that. Having visited the Comstock in 2017 as part of my 50th birthday tour of the United States, I thought it was time I actually sat down and built a model of the place, and it gave me a better understanding of what I'd read in a number of books. Right, next slide. Right, I'm going to talk briefly because my talks in the UK tend to sort of go on for about an hour and a half or 2 hours, so 20 minutes isn't a great deal of time. I'm going to introduce you to the process of the model of how I create the models, and it's got a flow sheet, which you'll see in a couple of pages' time. I'm going to describe briefly the sources of the underground maps that I've used, and that's specifically to Nevada rather than anywhere else. I'll talk a little bit about where I get the surface topography data from, and then I'm going to finish up with what the talk is really about, and that's the example of some of the mine models. Right, next slide, please. So the process as it comes up on the screen, first thing to do is to select your mine or mining district, and I put in brackets or what seemed like a good idea, and that is very true in when you start thinking that, yeah, this seems like a good idea, I've heard about that place, I'll go and look, and it's not as easy. So you do spend a considerable amount of time trying to find sources of information. In the UK, mine plans are, I would say, easy to get hold of, but because they've been stored by law since about 1870, then we do have a good archive of mining information. I have spent during lockdown a considerable amount of time searching the internet for stuff. Once you've got your plans, then it's time to sit down and do some tracing. So from that, I construct a centerline drawing, or even trace the outline of the passages if there are some. And it says there, this can be time consuming. And I can tell you that some of the ones you'll see coming up may have taken days, if not weeks, to trace. Once you've created your center line, you've got your skeleton, then it's time to scale, rotate and elevate everything so it's all in its 3D space. From that, I construct a solid model from the center lines to give the mines some degree of shape. And hopefully at that stage, I actually reasonably impressed with what I see. It would be a shame not to be, I suppose. Once I've got the underground more or less models, then I look for some surface topography. It gives it an idea of not only scale, but it sort of helps to sort of knit the underground workings to something that we can all see. And the best source of information I found for the mines in the United States is the US National Map, which you may have come across. Luckily, you can download the contours and roads and other stuff as a shape file, which I can load into a GIS package. And from that, I create a three-dimensional surface from the contours, and then I can overlay an aerial photograph if I can get hold of one. So you've actually got a sort of a surface drape. Then I've discovered that I found this wonderful source of information, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, and that's the Sanborn fire maps. Now, there's nothing like this in the UK, so they are, I think, an invaluable source of information, especially for sort of mining historians, because they do date back to when a lot of the mines were operating. So in that case, if you things like Virginia City, yeah, locate them and then select the most suitable year, which hopefully sort of knits in with the years when the mines were actually operating. You load those images into, say, AutoCAD, like the mine plans, and then you spend some more time digitizing the outlines of all the buildings. You create some nice solids from them so they look real, and then you can overlay them into their real world 3D space, which again takes a little time. I then add some titles and other useful text so other people apart from myself can understand what they're looking at. And then once you've done that, it's time to combine both the underground and the surface models together. And that can be the most awkward process because your mine plans are not always on a particular grid system. So as long as they're all in I'd say feet and inches, then at least there's not too much of a problem with scale. But trying to sort of match shafts to locations on the surface can actually be problematical. At that stage, I sit back, normally with a beer, and hopefully at that stage I am impressed, and I say sometimes relieved that I've actually got there. From the solid models, I load them into an animation package. We call it 3D Max. It's produced by the same company as AutoCAD. And in that, I create an animation. And after I've done that, I've normally posted it and then onto the internet so people around the world can have a look. So if they go onto my Abandoned Mine Models Facebook page, and they also go onto the website. And it's nice to know that when you do that and you're posting something, a model of a mine that's not in your country, but it belongs to someone else's, so you might say mining history, it's nice to get feedback to say, yeah, that's, you know, it is impressive. The three mining districts you're going to see have all had quite a Cornish influence to them. And actually, if I were to show you some of the mines in Cornwall, you would say there's, in some cases, there is certainly a resemblance in the underground layouts. Right, next slide, please. Next slide, Barbara, please. Right. Oh, right. All the models you're going to see today have been created from plans and sections and other data which has been brilliantly digitized and stored for all mining historians to view and use, and that's thanks to the University of Nevada in Reno. And it was something I came across because almost by accident, but once I discovered this web portal which allowed me to search by mining district, and it's a degree of my ignorance about Nevada that I discovered that there was absolutely, you know, a large number of mining districts. You know, it says here 344, and I had no idea. So I spent a lot of time learning as much as searching for information. And most of the maps, especially of Goldfield and Tonopah, have come from this particular web portal. And if you haven't come across it or used it, it's highly recommended. Next slide, please. The information that's stored on the national map, which allows for the sort of surface topography, the most important thing is the contours. And I've discovered that these have been mapped at 20 or 40 feet intervals. In the UK, we normally run on 5, 10 or 25 meter contours, but 20 or 40 foot is good enough for me. It's good enough to make a three-dimensional surface out of. You just have to be careful. The problem I discovered, and it's something perhaps some of you may know the answer to, unlike the Ordnance Survey in the UK, I've yet to find or locate, using the national map, a source of modern maps that contain building data. So that's outlines of towns and things like that. If you look on an Ordnance Survey map for the UK, all the buildings are shown. But I had trouble locating the same in the States, which is probably why I ended up locating the Sanborn fire maps. But that takes us on to the next slide, please. If you've not seen a Sanborn fire map, here's one of Virginia City or a section of Virginia City from 1890. The beauty of this is that not only does it contain all the structures in terms of dwellings and shops and churches and other buildings that we won't go into, but it also contains the buildings that relate to the mining operations. And you can learn an awful lot just by spending some time studying the maps to find out, this is where the winder was, where the boilers were, or where the stamps were kept, or whatever. And I say, from an historian based in the UK, you can get sidetracked very easily, because once you've seen one of these and you think, oh yes, I'll go and see if there's a map for, say, Grass Valley in California, for instance, and then you start spending time looking at that and perhaps not doing other things that you should be up to. But the beauty of a Sanborn map is A, the buildings are on it, and B, the road network is there. And it's important that the roads are shown, because they allow you the one connection that allows you to map this selection of models onto the real world surface topography, because you can line the roads up with the modern US map. That does take a bit, I'm afraid to say, it's a bit of a best fit, because with the best will in the world, the surveys done in 1890 are not quite the same degree of accuracy, I would say, as a modern survey, but they are pretty close. And if you want to look for any other places, then a Google search of the National Library of Congress and you will find thousands of Sanborn maps to look at if you so wish. The beauty of these, they're all drawn in feet, they're all drawn to the same scale. It makes life so much easier from a model building point of view, because you can just you scale each individual photograph in AutoCAD to a scale of, say, 1 to 50 feet. And then once you've digitized or traced each individual sheet, you can then begin the process of joining the models together. So you'll see at the top of the page on sheet 8, it says see sheet 6, and at the bottom it probably says sheet 9. So once you've got those, you can make it a bit like a jigsaw. Right, next slide, please. The image on the left is Sanborn map from 1877, and the one image on the right is a Google Earth image from today. And when I drove down through Gold Hill, say 4 years ago nearly, I had no idea how many buildings there actually had been until I found the Sanborn map. And it is quite an incredible source from that point of view. You can look back and say, a place like Gold Hill had nearly 8,000 people, mainly Cornish, living there. And you can see, there is an awful lot of buildings. And in the modern photograph, there isn't as nearly as many. And it was quite an eye-opener to me when I first saw these. The other thing you can use, which is good on this, is the railway line, which is present as a bit of a curve halfway up the Sanborn map. You can see the curve in the real photograph, and the difference you can see now between the two is the railway line now curves round the contours rather than going through a tunnel, which they've obviously stopped using, perhaps for safety reasons, I would think. But it gives you an idea of what was there. You know, you can't turn the clock back any other way, I think. Right, next slide. For those who haven't been to Virginia City, these are a few black and white shots taken during the heyday of mining there, and some of these buildings will appear in one form or another on the Sanborn maps, and then hence they appear on my mine model, which you're going to see in a minute. Right, next slide. Taken from the UNR library is this wonderful plan. There are others belonging to the US Geological Survey plans of the Comstock, but this one was complete to 1910, so it had a few more workings on it than some of the earlier ones. It is drawn, the squares on it are drawn at 100 feet intervals, which gives you an indication of scale of how big the or how long on strike the mines are. You get some idea, if you study this, the depth of the workings below surface, and you get an idea of the complexity of the ore zone that they were actually mining. And you can see fairly clearly the zones of where the great bonanzas that took place are located. The only problem with those, they are stacked one upon the other, and therefore from a model building point of view, it can be a little tricky. So a map like that would take me possibly maybe 2 weeks to trace entirely, and then possibly another week to sort of build into 3D. So if we move on, next slide. You might need to press again, Barbara, this to get the animation to work. And hopefully this will won't be too jittery. This is an animation of the topography and underground workings. And you can see the modern locations of Gold Hill and Virginia City. And as it spins round, you can just about make out the underground workings underneath. But as we get round to the Reno side of the model, the surface will disappear.
Keith, you have 5 minutes.
Oh, bloody hell, right. We will get this through this one. I think it would be a case, Barbara. We'll move on. If people want to see it, then they can have a quick look on my website. We'll go on. Quickly skip through. If you want to have a look, there's Tonopah, and when I went there, the image doesn't show the degree of temperature. It was about the low 20s Fahrenheit, so freezing. We'll move on. Again, the website contains a lot of plans, and these are some of the plans that are done by the Houston Oil and Minerals Corporation. So they're drawn at, again, 100-foot intervals for the levels in Tonopah. So there are maybe 10 of these, which cover the whole set of workings. Each one digitized. So we move on. Once you've digitized everything and the Sanborn maps, you get an idea of this is a composite of the two. If you'd like to press there, it might animate. If you've been to Tonopah and had a drive through, perhaps you've had some idea of the complexity of the mine workings or the degree of mining that's taken place, but perhaps this model will give you a better understanding of how complicated the mine network actually is. I think there's something like 150 to 200 miles inside that, in that particular model. I haven't put any stoping on it yet. Putting stoping on 3D models is a level of difficulty up from producing the passages, and it just takes so much time that I've not got around to doing it yet. Right, next slide, please, Barbara. Until I was on the road between Tonopah and Las Vegas, I never knew this place existed until we drove through it. And then once I got back to the UK, it was time to sort of investigate exactly what I'd seen. And lo and behold, out of that research came this wonderful sort of history of gold and silver mining that I knew nothing about. You've got a photograph of the Mohawk mine on the left. You've got a combination or a composite map in the middle, which is an original, which is what the model has been built from. And on the right-hand side, you've got the complete AutoCAD level plans, all stacked one on top of the other. Each one individually coloured and elevated, so they stand out from each other, makes editing, from my point of view, a little easier. We have the next slide, please, Barbara. And this one is another animation. So click, please. So this final animation is an impression of what some of the mines in Goldfield actually look like. And you can see it is actually quite a complicated structure. And there are a number of shafts. I noticed that one of the claims was named the Cornishman. So I'm sure if I dig deeper into the personnel records or whatever for people here, I'm sure I'll find a few more Cornish names. I have been promised by one of the explorers who lives in Goldfield that if I ever make a return trip, then he will take me on a trip underground and I can experience the underground firsthand. One can only hope. Right, last slide, please, Barbara. And to finally close, well, if you want more information on anything you've seen, or you'd like to know anything more about mine modelling, or you might even have some plans, or you know of some good sources of plans that will make good models, well, then you can get in touch with me either via the email on the screen or via the website. The image on the left, I'm afraid, is not Nevada, but it's got a connection with Nevada via George Hurst and some of the others who mined in Virginia City. And that is the world famous and very deep home state mine of South Dakota. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening, and it's all yours, Barbara.